Hey folks, how's everybody doing? Hope y'all are doing well wherever you're at on this beautiful planet that we call the Earth. I'm alive, I'm surviving, thriving, living the dream. As long as I ain't in the graveyard, it's a good day. Welcome to this little informal talk. I would say this is a men's health video, but no, this is more of just a health video, sort of tied into travel / tropical medicine. If you're not into listening to, issues that can affect your health during a trip, after a trip, or during everyday life, maybe this ain't the show for you. But I do these videos based on when I start talking to people and listening to their personal experiences. And I actually have a playlist. If you'll click that playlist, I talk about all kind of different ailments that you might suffer, or pick up from a tropical environment or from traveling. And I'm going to add this video to that playlist. And basically it's a follow-up from a video I did several years ago about travelers' diarrhea, right? And that covers a wide range of, bacteria. Commonly, they'll just refer to it as TD, traveler's diarrhea, but you may hear it called Montezuma's revenge, the deli belly, any number of names if you pick up some type of stomach bug, some type of bacteria, and cause you to shit like a goose all day, right? And things like this happen to people who travel to different regions of the world. Say you're from the West, you go down to Mexico, don't drink the water, okay? Because you're not used to the germs and the bugs that are in that area. And it's the same for anybody traveling to different regions, right? Your immune system has not been exposed to the types of germs that are local to that area, right? And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell basically the rest of the story. I meant to do this video years ago, but there's been actually a new development with my buddies. I call him Spider. And so check out the video. You know what? I'll put it, well, I don't know if I can put it up there. Well, bing, there's how to search it right there. But basically, Spider came to the Philippines and ended up getting sick, some type of stomach bug, stomach bacteria, and ended up shitting like a goose for basically the majority of his trip. And what we narrowed it down to was that he got sick in Manila. And he thinks it was the lettuce on the breakfast bar at the place where he was at, which is very possible. Because if you eat cooked food and it's cooked thoroughly, it's going to kill all the bacteria. But if you eat any type of fresh fruit or lettuce that's been washed with the tap water, well, that's one way that you could pick it up, right? There's so many different ways. Anyhow, he thinks that he got it from the lettuce at a salad bar down in Manila. A few days later, we're up in Angeles City. He gets sick and ends up, we went to 2 different hospitals in Angeles City. And the man ended up going home still sick, right? So whatever they diagnosed, I don't even remember exactly what it was. A lot of times it's not even a straight diagnosis, right? Oh, it's traveler's diarrhea, what have you. Here's some antibiotics. Depends on where you're at in the world, what kind of tests they do, what level of care is available, right? But you're typically going to end up taking some antibiotics to get rid of the bad bacteria that's in your system, causing you to paint the walls of the stalls, right? So anyhow, he goes back home and had taken a slew of antibiotics to solve this problem, right? And this is where I'm going to pick up the video to tell sort of the rest of the story. I don't know why I didn't do this years ago. But, and the reason I do it is because, say you go to your physician in the backwoods of Alabama, right? What is that physician used to treating? He's used to treating local ailments there that he sees all the time, right? He's probably not used to tropical medicine, he or she. They're not used to tropical medicine because Alabama is not in the tropics, right? And so say you take a trip somewhere and you go to the tropics, or you go to, I hate using the word developing nation, but you go somewhere outside the West and you come back and you're sick, your local doctor is not in the mindset of thinking about tropical medicine. He's thinking about what does he see every day, right? And this is where the subjective interview is very important, right? Now, I used to be a paramedic, and so we have what's called SOAP. When you look at a patient, there's a subjective interview, which you're listening to what the patient is telling you, and you're getting that background. You know, what's wrong with you? What do you hurt? Then you go to the objective, that's the O. That's where you do the examination, right? Head to toe, systematically, regardless of what the guy told you, he or she told you. A is your assessment, and P is your plan of treatment, what have you. Anyhow. So I think it's important, like, to share these stories, because what happens is if you travel and you go back home and you're sick, it's very important that during that interview, talking to the doctor, that you relay that, hey man, not for nothing, but I was down in Central America for 2 weeks and I came back and I've been sick. I didn't get sick here in America. I got sick in Central America. I was, swimming in this river, what have you, or I was in the Philippines. I was in some island off the coast of wherever, and it was less than perfect conditions, right? You need to relay to the physician where you've been and what you've been up to, so it changes that physician's mindset as to what can be going on with you. And so that's part of this talk, right? I told this story, I've told it many times, where there was a girl several years ago, I believe from Denmark. She came to the Philippines, went home, got sick, went to the hospital, and she ended up dying. And after it was all over, they figured out what had happened. She was in the PI. She basically adopted some street puppy and was feeding it back in her room, and the puppy had rabies. She goes back there, and apparently they didn't pick up on the fact or the possibility that it could be rabies. And I think, I'm just speculating, but I think it had a lot to do with the subjective interview, that those doctors weren't thinking or told or reiterated to them, hey, she's been in the Philippines for 2 weeks. Maybe they did reiterate that, but they're not used to seeing those types of cases, right? So anyhow, it's very important if you get sick after traveling, that you make it clear to your doctor where you've been and exactly what you've been up to, whether it's pretty or not. You know, if you were in this country, in this city, hanging out in strip clubs and, sleeping with a different girl every night, that's something you need to tell your physician, right? Anyhow, be honest, right? So Spider, he goes back home, and after taking all these antibiotics, he still has diarrhea, fever, stomach pain, loss of appetite, and ends up going to, I think I'll have to clarify, but I think 3 different doctors, 3 different hospitals trying to figure out what's going on. And was getting misdiagnosed because they just weren't thinking along these lines, until he got to one physician that asked him some questions, or it was the pharmacist. I can't remember how he found out, but he got on the subject of what's called Clostridium difficile. It's commonly referred to as C. diff. C. diff is a bacteria that causes diarrhea, colitis. But the way you get this typically is it occurs when you've been taking antibiotics, or not long after you've taken a regime of antibiotics. And the thing about taking antibiotics, it's killing everything. It can kill everything in your gut. Now there's good bacteria, there's bad bacteria, right? So sometimes the antibiotics kill the good bacteria that's fighting the C. diff, and it allows the C. diff to grow. Did I mention I'm not a doctor? I'm not a I'm not a physician. Okay, so take what I'm saying. The only objective of these talks is so you can sort of intelligently go to your doctor and say, hey, you need to rule this out. So, you know, the man gets sick in the PI, takes a bunch of antibiotics. This shit continues, gets misdiagnosed, and finally somebody says, this sounds like C. diff. You were taking antibiotics for a while, right? Yeah. Let's rule out C. diff, right? And another fun fact, I think it's around 1 in 6 people who get it will have a reinfection 2 to 8 weeks later. There's only roughly 500,000 infections in the USA every year. So that's not very many, right? So physicians aren't thinking C. diff. You got to put that in their head. If you travel somewhere, got sick, took a bunch of antibiotics, and now you're still sick, you need to say, hey, what about C. diff? This thing called C. diff, where after antibiotics, you end up getting this, okay? What's the treatment? Let's see. And folks, again, I mentioned I'm not a doctor. All this is just for you to bring up and think to ask your doctor to rule this out. Vancomycin, how do you say that? Fidaxomicin and metronidazole. I say that wrong. I think that's Flagyl. Anyhow, that's C. diff. So Spider ends up getting diagnosed with C. diff, and they have to, the pharmacist said he actually had to mix up a special cocktail. Like, it's not, the medicine that they prescribed for him wasn't, oh, there's one right there in the box. He had to mix this shit up, right? Because it's pretty serious. So remember that right there. C. diff, if you go somewhere, you have traveler's diarrhea, you eat a bunch of antibiotics, and you're still shitting like a goose after 2-3 months, you go to your doctor and explain to him the situation and mention the word C. diff, where he gets to thinking along these lines. What if you go there and you don't tell him the whole backstory, him or her? They're not going to start thinking along those lines. Okay, so it's very important to tell them the backstory and throw these words out there so they don't think that it's something going on with your colon or, you know, other organs, right? They can start thinking, well, maybe this is the simplest explanation based on this gentleman's adventures, right? So that was years ago. Recently, as I'm speaking with Spider, for months now, he's been losing weight, and I'll just tell you the symptoms, right? Just constantly bloated, sometimes a little nausea, burping, heartburn, gas, and weight loss. And so those are the basic symptoms that he's been experiencing. Well, what's going on, right? So they've done this whole gamut of trying to figure out what's wrong with them, to the point that they thought it was ulcers, and they end up doing, I believe they did an endoscopy, but they said, hey, it's not ulcers. It's not ulcers. Okay, well, why is the guy losing weight? Why is he bloating? Why is he burping and farting all the time, right? Well, introducing H. pylori. Okay, Campylobacter is very similar, but this is Helicobacter pylori, and it'll just be abbreviated as H. pylori. Okay, it's another bacteria that grows in your stomach. Now, follow these statistics, right? Depending on where you look, 1/2 to 2/3 of the world's population has H. pylori in their stomach, right? Now, you look at the stats, it's like 30% in the West, in developing nations, and then the rest of them are in developing nations, right? So in other words, it's more prominent in developing nations. You can contract it the fecal-oral route. It's very contagious. and it can increase the risk of stomach cancer or long-term stomach problems. So how do you test for this? Okay, and it's kind of weird because when I first moved to Southeast Asia, it was back when I was on Facebook. This is prior to, I don't know, 2013, 2012. When I would look at these forums, people would talk about this stuff all the time, and they would debate it and say, oh, if you eat the street food, you know, you'll get it, and blah, blah, blah. I really didn't pay attention to all this because I eat the street food every day. Here we just call it food. And I never had a problem. I never had any health problems in Thailand. My health problems, not health problems, but ailments started happening to me over the PI. And I had never had really anything happen to me here in Thailand other than the clap. So how do you test for H. pylori? Now let's back up and say most of the people that have H. pylori, they don't know they have it. Like I may have it right now, I don't know it because I'm asymptomatic. In other words, I don't have any problems. I don't know it's there. It can just sort of lie there dormant and not affect you. And then one day it starts affecting you like my buddy Spider. Just feels like his stomach is just full of ulcers, when in actuality it's not. But if left untreated, it can develop into ulcers and maybe ultimately some type of stomach cancer. How do you test for this? Well, the most invasive is endoscopy, you know, sticking some stuff down your throat to take a look. But there's two tests that aren't invasive. It's a breath test, and there's also a stool test. Those right there are the most accurate because they can tell whether or not you actively have H. pylori. And I would say, for me, I think the stool sample, the stool antigen is the most definitive. There's also a blood antibody test, but all it does is tell you if you have antibodies to H. pylori. So if you had it in the past, you may still show antibodies. So it can't tell you whether or not it's active or not. So if you get a blood test and they say, yeah, you're positive, you don't know if it's active. It may have been active before, maybe you were treated for it before. So basically the stool test, right? The stool test or the breath test. And so, how does this get treated? It basically gets treated with 3 different antibiotics together for 14 days. And you do any research on this, they'll tell you, yeah, it sounds like a whole lot of medicine. Well, it is. So the doctor is going to give you 3 different antibiotics, 14 days. They're probably going to prescribe some what's called PPI, proton pump inhibitors, that stop the acid production in your stomachs, like Prilosec, Nexium, Prevacid, maybe some Pepto-Bismol, and if you can't use PPIs, they'll give you something like Tagamet, right? And then after you take that regime of medicine for 14 days, you're going to get retested, right? So that's what my buddy Spider is recently dealing with. Is all this connected? I mean, who knows? The man got sick in Manila, shitting like a goose, ate a bunch of prescribed. He took a bunch of antibiotics. Later on, diagnosed with C. diff, took those antibiotics to deal with that. And now here we are years later, and H. pylori is affecting him. Now he's taking those antibiotics, which should clear that up. So, I just thought I would bring this up. Some of y'all probably watched that old video. I think it's like 2.5 hours long of me just sitting there rambling. I'll put the link down in the description. But it's quite a funny story about Spider. You know, going to a hospital in the Philippines and, you know, basically shitting all over himself, goes to the CR. There's no toilet paper. There's no aspirator. There's no water. It's just a toilet there. You can't make this shit up. But anyhow, click that link and watch that story. But if you travel and you end up with any of those ailments that I've described. And when I did that video, I got so many emails from people saying that the same thing happened to them, you know, when they went on their trip, wherever they went, right? And one of the recommendations I've always made is, like, if you take one vacation a year, you're the type of guy that gets 1 or 2 weeks vacation a year, well, your insurance probably pays for an annual physical, right? So what I would do if I had health insurance in America and I was taking vacations, you know, 1 week a year, I would schedule, and it's quite obvious, it's not rocket science, but I would schedule my yearly physical 2 weeks after I got back off my trip. That's what I would do. So if I went to Angeles City and I was a 2-week millionaire and blew it out, or I went to Pattaya, or I went to Mtwapa, if I went to Cancun, Cabo, wherever you're going to go, especially if you're a bachelor, and party for 2 weeks, well, when you get back home, schedule your appointment 2 weeks later and tell your doctor exactly where you've been, exactly what you've been up to, and let him use that subjective interview to decide what he needs to do outside the normal test in a yearly physical. Does that make sense? So I hope this, I don't want to say this talk was entertaining, but we'll just go back through it. C. Diff, put it there, right there on the screen. Right there on the screen. C. Diff, if you are continuously shitting after a bout of traveler's diarrhea and antibiotics. And then if you're bloating and burping and bloating and losing weight, even though you're trying to eat, H. pylori. Or if it feels like you have ulcers, rule out H. pylori. There you go. There's a couple of buzzwords. Make sure you check out my tropical medicine / travel survival episodes, and you can learn more about everything from parasites to hand, foot, and mouth disease, and many more. Want to learn about chlamydia? I got one video about that too. And so I can't just say men's health. You know, most of these videos are just personal experience. And again, I'm not a doctor. Let me give the final disclaimer. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not prescribing medication. All I'm doing is sharing my personal experiences or the experiences of my friends so that you can bring these things up with your doctor, with a licensed medical professional. There you go. There you go. All right, folks. If you got any personal experiences, leave them down in the comments, because people learn more in the comments than they learn from my talk in situations like this. When it's a video with a serious topic, like I said, most of the answers lie, and most of the learning points lie down in the comments from others. Hey, appreciate you joining me. Y'all have a wonderful day. And shout out to Spider, man. Thanks for letting me share your story, man. I don't know how many people you've helped, but that lettuce or whatever it did you in, man, we learned so many things, you know. So many things that I would have never thought about. I used to be in the medical field. But C. diff, maybe if you work in the hospital and you work in a nursing home, you're familiar with that. But I say the average person, I think it's safe to say, right? Maybe the average person doesn't think about C. diff or understand how it works, especially if you've been taking antibiotics. Anyhow, I'm out of here, folks. Thanks for joining me. See y'all on the next one. And peace out.